What is your most traumatic experience with a teacher? My 4th grade teacher had a reputation for making one boy in her class an unpopular scapegoat each year. Lucky me. In previous years, I'd just been another kid in the playground, but within 2 months, the other kids wouldn't play with me during recess. One day, I refused to go outside for recess. She asked why, and I foolishly told her that the other kids didn't like me. When they came back in, she marched me to the front of the class and asked for a show of hands who didn't like me. 4th grade kids mostly did what 4th grade kids do. I broke down that night and told my mom what happened and what had been going on all along. She marched into school the next day, got a meeting that included the principal, and tore the teacher a new asshole. I was still stuck in that class, but the teacher moved on to a new victim. Funny thing how self-esteem influences academic performance. My school used to give us a Stanford Binet, I never knew, IQ test every year. My score dropped 10 points from 3rd to 4th grade, then rose 20 points in 5th grade when I had a nurturing teacher. If you are still alive, frick you, Mrs. Erickson, frick you. When I was in high school, I got a lot of nosebleeds, like a lot. So I got one in the middle of class and I asked the teacher for a tissue. She said she didn't have any, so I asked to go to the toilet and get one, and she said no. Soon I asked again when blood dripping from the what? Sounds like they have a nosebleed while writing this. And she yelled at me for repeating myself, which is apparently bad. Soon a puddle of blood was on the table, then I got sent to isolation for disrupting the class. I was then suspended for acting inappropriate during class. Then she was fired for putting my life at risk. I gotta say, when you get a nosebleed like that, you really see how much blood is inside that damn body of yours. Penguins flipper. I had the exact same. I used to get nosebleeds in high school and most teachers were just cool about it. My English teacher even started keeping a tissue box in his classroom. But my history teacher, well, she was just a batch of unsavory cookies about it. Like, I'd raise my hand to be excused and he'd just ignore it until I got up and left for the bathroom. And then the kicker, when I got back to class, he'd make some sort of batched cookie about people going out of class without asking permission. He really was a good and nice teacher outside of that, so it really confused me why he had to do that. But yeah, I ruined a couple shirts with blood stains because of that. Should have written an assignment with your blood then. I was bullied really bad. Kids kept drawing awful, ugly photos and leaving them on my desk with profanity towards my appearance. I had enough one day after dealing with a lot of abuse at home and the bullying at school, and when I saw another, broke down crying and brought it to my teacher. She just grabbed it, looked, asked if I wanted it back, did nothing to help, wouldn't listen to me about the constant bullying, and did absolutely nothing. I was in 7th grade and still remember it to this day. Gay baby all like, yo, what the fire truck? Teacher told me I was a liar to the whole class as she didn't believe my grandmother was a World War II evacuee. She flat out refused to believe me as she assumed my mom was much younger than she looked at the time, and therefore my grandmother was younger as well. She thought my mom was in her late 20s when in reality she was in her early 40s at the time. Conversely, I had a teacher when I was in primary school who couldn't believe that a student had no grandparents who were old enough to be asked about their experiences in World War II for a project we were doing. This was in 99ish, so not too hard to imagine that it just involves having 2 generations have children in their early 20s. Literally got the parents in because she thought the child was being deliberately obstructive and didn't want to do the work. It could have been 1949. A kid could have 0 grandparents to ask about World War II for the simple reason that their grandparents did not survive the experience. My Grandparents' World War II Experiences by Billy, grade 4. They did. Didn't traumatize me personally, but I had a first-year lecturer in classics who went out of his way to terrorize the class. His first words to us were, "I suspect as many as half of you cannot read," and then administered a test, which 2/3 of the class failed. He was not shy about voicing his rather gleeful displeasure. I did well to avoid his wrath and annoyingly get singled out for the praise instead. He would routinely throw questions at students who weren't paying rigorous attention in a 3-hour lecture on Friday morning, and then berate them for not knowing the answers. His comments on papers were beyond trenchant. Are you illiterate? Do you imagine this makes sense? This is childish, etc., etc. The real unfortunate part is that he was a superb classicist. I don't know what that is. A close second was a novelist turned writing professor who hurled a girl's manuscript out of his office door, nearly hitting me in the hall as he shouted, "This is not writing!" She came out to pick up her magnum opus moments later, weeping. Great writer, self-confessed shite teacher. Teacher? Sure. My favorite teacher in middle school was arrested for child. He wasn't my favorite after that. He also wasn't my teacher after that. During quiet reading time, teacher brought me to the front of the class because I was reading a book for girls, and he asked me, "Why are you reading a girl's boys book? Are you a girl? Then made me choose a book for boys to read. I was maybe 10 or 11. The book was Matilda, by the way. Got accused of plagiarism over a paper I wrote and didn't plagiarize that I was really excited about because of how well I thought I did on it. Enthusiasm fully destroyed. I had a similar experience where my lit professor brought me in to tell me my paper was flagged by the software for being plagiarized from over 180 other student papers from around the world. Not websites, not public articles, student papers from other schools. Longest chain of plagiarized words was 6. I laughed because I thought she was pointing out how ridiculously sensitive the software was. She was offended that I laughed at her. I asked her if she really believed that I tracked down almost 200 students to steal 3-word phrases from them and stick them together into a paper, which would take 50 times the effort that it actually took to write it. Not in, those exact words. I really thought I wrote a great paper. Got an A, but I think it was just because she felt dumb. This sounds like a this sounded better in my head scenario. Yes, it definitely does. I said that the dot over the I or J is called a tittle. She said it's not a tittle, it's a dot. And with that, she accused me of being impertinent. I read titty. Technically it was the VP, but the day my brother died, apparently he thought it would be a good idea to walk in on story time. The teacher was, of course, reading to the class, set me on his lap, and tell me in front of everyone that my brother committed suicide. That is f***ed up. We were discussing Jean Vanier and Lark. Larch. This sounds like art. Therefore, I don't know. For context, Jean Vanier decided to invite 2 intellectually disabled men to live with him and started setting up homes for them so they wouldn't be in asylums. Okay. The teacher looked right at me, I'm disabled, and said, "Oh yeah, Vanier created those homes so you people wouldn't be bothering people because the handicapped don't function in society." My friend I left just to talk it out. He got fired a few years later because he didn't have his license up to date. Cherry on top, his wife was the vice principal. I got into a shouting match with my band director before a marching band competition in another state. He had anger issues and the fight was over him calling me out in front of everyone for messing up my saxophone solo the week before. There was no one else around to see or hear the shouting. He never said so much as a word to me for the remainder of my time in high school, and you know what? I was pretty damn fine with it. One time I was on my period and asked the teacher to go to the bathroom multiple times. She refused to let me go. Eventually, I stained the uniform and the chair. I was so embarrassed that I started crying, and when my mother found out, she made the school fire that motherfucker. In 5th grade, I would often become sick to my stomach and cry for hours. Later in life, found out that these were panic attacks. My teacher, his bright idea, spanked me with a bungee cord until I stopped crying. I still resent her and my parents for that. Spanked me with a bungee cord until I stopped crying. Do people have brains? Or because doing something like that will probably, if you think about it, make a problem a little bit worse. Doesn't usually solve said problem. The girls in our elementary school were given a proto-ed before the boys. The basic puberty stuff, your body is starting to change, you might develop some breasts, sweating, and all that stuff. They made a huge stupid deal about keeping it quiet. It's the girls' little secret. Don't go spreading it around school. It only occurs to me now that this is kind of dangerous in the wider scope of things. Anyway, my best friend was a boy, and naturally I skipped right off to tell him why suddenly half the class had assembly all by themselves. My teacher heard about it, got me alone, grabbed me by both arms, and shook me. Keep your mouth shut. She was my favorite teacher up until then. Yeah, totally a great thing to teach a kid. Used to love math and science until I had a teacher in 6th grade who would bully, mock, and do everything in his power to embarrass me in front of the entire class. I lost all of my love for school after that class. Rock you, Mr. Bright. He doesn't live up to his name, sadly. Yeah, no one is ever going to be taking Mr. Bright's side. Not exactly me, but had a teacher yell at one of my friends for not doing his homework and give him Saturday school, even though his parents had died the night before. Jesus, dude. The one and only detention I ever received occurred in somewhat related, though decidedly less horrible circumstances. I was in 3rd grade and had a math teacher that had this stupid policy that every math test after she had graded it needed to be brought home and signed by her parents and returned to her within 2 days. During that school year, my mom got in a terrible car accident in which she got hit head-on by a semi-truck. She almost died, was permanently crippled, and spent several months in the hospital. We had a math test a couple days after her accident. My stepdad spent the whole week in the hospital by my mom's side, no doubt out stressed out of his damn mind and not knowing if she would pull through. He didn't want to bring my brother or me to the hospital, as he didn't know if we could handle seeing my mom in that condition. My brother and I were left home alone all week, with neighbors occasionally checking in on us to drop off meals. Anyway, I hadn't seen either of my parents in days and obviously couldn't get either of them to sign my test. When I tried to explain the situation to my teacher, she cut me off and said she doesn't allow excuses, or some similar BS, and gave me detention the following day. Since I didn't have anybody at home who could pick me up, I had to walk the 2 miles or so home from school after the detention. A week or so later, when my brother told my stepdad about everything that had happened, he showed up to pick me up from school, which he'd never done before, as we took the bus to from school, and absolutely tore the teacher a new one, almost bringing her to tears. The teacher never apologized to me, or even looked me in the eyes again for that matter, and I forged signatures on every other test that year. Also, I had gotten 100% on the test that led to my detention. So when I was in kindergarten, I didn't make it to the bathroom in time and once wet myself. Went to the nurse's office, got new clothes, but instead of panties, I had to wear a pull-up. It's not a big deal. I guess it was a school policy for kids my age. I don't really know. When I got back to class, my teacher loudly goes, "Oh, good, the baby's finally back," or something like that. She also knew about the policy and asked if I was wearing a diaper so that every other student could hear her. I was 5 and felt a ton of shame and humiliation. I started crying and trying to get out of school a lot because of it. My teacher often referred to me as a baby for the rest of the year. Also, she would constantly ask if I needed to potty or if I was wearing a diaper like a toddler or something. The horrifying thing is that you probably didn't have the social or verbal skills to explain this to your parents and understand it's something that could be stopped. What a horrible teacher. In the 8th grade, I had a book report to do for 4 books, all due on the same day. That was way too overwhelming to do at the time. I had some serious domestic violence going on at home between my parents, spent all of my time taking care of my younger brother, cleaning up the house, cooking, and crying from all the stress. It was worth 20% of my grade, and the day before it was due, I broke down and told my teacher everything, down to the time when my brother bled from his head from being hit by my dad, to the most recent attempted murder upon my mom. If I had even received a B, my dad would have beat the out of my mom for giving birth to a stupid kid. He called child services, my parents received the call, and gave me the silent treatment for 3 days. They told him I lied just to get out of the assignment. The social worker told my teacher what my parents said and made the rest of my year a living hell. He treated me with such pettiness after that and threatened to call my parents whenever I had either spoken too loud in class or whenever I was unparticipative in gym. He called my parents for my bad behavior. Home life got significantly harder after that, and my parents told my entire family continuously how stupid I was for telling them. They laughed at me when I cried or got upset about it. Years later, after repressing everything, I was diagnosed with severe PTSD from childhood trauma as a witness and victim of domestic violence, attempted murder thrice, and it took me 3 years in therapy to get over it. It was quick, but it was tough as it was during my university years and I ended up having to take on an extra year of school to catch up mentally. I was ready to speak up about my struggles again when I couldn't function anymore, as the traumatic flashbacks occurred twice a week for hours at a time. I couldn't do a single thing except tremble and live in fear. I was 18 by the time I was ready to reach out for help. F you, Mr. Gentle. Your name is creepy as hell, and I really do wonder if being a petty 33-year-old to a 12-year-old child made your quality of life better. I hope that there's proper procedures put in place to protect children from such experiences. So back in 1st grade, I was at this private school, and despite not enjoying reading, I actually loved school and had a ton of friends, and it was great. Got along with everyone. One day, my sister stayed home sick and my parents dropped me off, and as I was walking in, I said hi to the nun that taught the other 1st grade class. She said hi and I kept walking. As I approached the end of the hall, she dropped her keys, so I turned around and looked. In between her were 2 4th grade boys I recognized from my sister's class. They started to approach her to pick up her keys when she lost it and started screaming at me that I was rude and awful and some other terrible not-so-nun-like things. The boys were confused, I was confused, they were closer and going to help, but she was furious that I, the kid way down the hall, didn't help her. I got pulled out of class to talk to the principal that day. Between her and the nun, I really thought I did something horrible. I was punished to make me feel like I murdered this nun. When my dad picked me up that day, I just started to sob, and I didn't stop until we got home and my mom and dad and sister all had to help me. I was having a full-blown panic attack. My moral values were being questioned and I was horrified at myself, and my parents were furious when they called my teacher demanding to know what happened. All she said was she was unsure and that I seemed to have a run-in with a nun. My parents went in the next morning for answers, and we got an apology from the principal, but not for that nun. And I remember standing at the counter with my big sister, terrified and sad, and this nun walks in and says, being rude to me again. My sister is standing there horrified. The front office secretary is shocked, and my mom ripped this nun a new one. The nun hadn't seen my parents there. My parents went to the head father at this parish and read him the riot act. The riot act. Okay, he was a first grader at the time. This is a 55-year-old man at the least. When he tried to defend the nun, they went to our bishop. He clobbered the whole school. But by then the damage was done. I was the target to the nun. Everything I did, she had a problem with. I stopped being myself at school. I became very insecure and quiet. My sisters and those boys took it upon themselves to check on me as often as possible. They became targets too. So at the end of the school year, my parents pulled us and we went to the new school. I never got my confidence back. When I was in 2nd grade, my mom died. When I was in 3rd grade, the evil witch of a teacher held me back from recess one day for something. While it was just us in the room, she asked if I went to church. I said no. Then she told me that I was going to hell and would never see my mom again.